The evening air was soft and filled with the faint sound of laughter spilling from the Grand Hotel. It was one of those nights when the city seemed to sparkle a little more than usual, and every guest arrived dressed to impress. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glowed like tiny suns, reflecting off the golden rims of glasses and the polished marble floor. Waiters glided across the room carrying trays of drinks, and a live jazz band played in the corner, setting a warm, elegant mood. Among the crowd of businessmen, socialites, and sponsors was a woman quietly moving between tables, checking that everything was in place. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't there to be seen or admired. She worked for the event's organizing team, someone who made sure everything ran smoothly while others enjoyed the spotlight. She adjusted flower arrangements, reminded servers about the schedule, and politely smiled whenever someone needed her help. Most people barely noticed her. To her, that was fine. She didn't crave attention. What she loved most was watching people enjoy the night, knowing she had played a small part in making it happen. Still, deep inside her there was something more. A quiet passion that had been asleep for years, buried beneath the noise of work and responsibility. At the center of the room stood a grand piano. Its black surface shone under the lights, untouched so far that evening. She couldn't help glancing at it every now and then. There was something about pianos that always pulled her in. It reminded her of the small upright one she grew up playing, back when her father would sit beside her, humming as she practiced. Life had changed since then. Time, loss, and work had taken her away from music. But that spark was still there, hidden behind her calm expression. As the night went on, laughter grew louder. A group of wealthy guests gathered near the piano talking over glasses of wine. Among them was a man who seemed to enjoy being the loudest in the room. His suit was expensive, his watch even more so, and he had the kind of confidence that came from money rather than kindness. He was known for being charming when he wanted to be, but also for mocking those he thought were beneath him. When he spoke, others laughed, even when his jokes weren't funny. He liked that. He liked feeling powerful. The woman, still making sure everything was perfect, passed by his table quietly. She didn't hear what he said at first, but his tone made her pause. He was bragging about his knowledge of art, about his donations to music schools, about his refined ear for talent. The more he spoke, the more people around him nodded, pretending to be impressed. Then, one of the other guests mentioned the piano sitting silently nearby. "It's a shame," he said. "We rented that piano, but no one's even touched it tonight." The man chuckled and looked around the room as if searching for entertainment. His eyes landed on the woman who was now checking a glass centerpiece nearby. "You there?" he called out with a playful grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been working all night. Why don't you come and play for us?" The room quieted slightly. A few people turned to look at her. She froze for a second, unsure he was even talking to her. "Me?" she asked softly, almost hoping he'd say he was joking. "Yes, you," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I heard someone say you used to play music. Come on, give us a tune. It'll be fun." A few people chuckled. The laughter wasn't cruel yet, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind that came from watching someone being pushed into an uncomfortable spot. Her face warmed. She looked around, embarrassed, not knowing how to respond. I don't really play anymore," she said politely. "It's been years." "Oh, come on," the man insisted, his voice louder now. "How hard can it be? It's just a few keys. Surely you remember something." More guests turned their heads. The music from the jazz band faded, as even the musicians seemed curious about what was happening. The room had started to focus entirely on this moment, the man with his smug grin, and the woman who wanted nothing more than to disappear. "I really shouldn't," she murmured, still trying to smile politely. The man laughed and stood up, raising his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "let's give our hard-working assistant a moment to shine. Who knows, maybe she's hiding a masterpiece." Laughter followed. Some guests clapped half-heartedly, unsure if they were encouraging her or mocking her. Her heart pounded. Every instinct told her to walk away, but something deep inside, something proud, something quiet but strong, kept her standing there. She could feel her hands trembling slightly, not from fear of playing, but from the humiliation of being treated like a sideshow. The event manager, standing nearby, gave her an apologetic look. "You don't have to," he whispered. But she shook her head faintly, There was no anger on her face, just calm acceptance. If they wanted her to play, she would. But she would play on her terms. She took a slow breath and walked toward the piano. The crowd parted slightly to let her through. Each step felt heavy, like walking into a storm. The man smirked, whispering something to his friends that made them laugh again. When she reached the piano, she ran her hand gently across the smooth surface. It was a beautiful instrument, perfectly tuned, polished, and waiting. She could almost feel her father's presence beside her again, reminding her that music wasn't about showing off. It was about heart. She sat down on the bench. The room was quiet now, except for the faint clinking of glasses in the distance. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a brief second, she closed her eyes. Memories flooded back. Afternoons spent practicing, the sound of rain outside the window, her father's encouraging voice. She opened her eyes again and looked out at the crowd. Some faces were amused, others curious. The man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly expecting a disaster. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not of confidence, but of peace. She pressed one key gently. A soft note filled the air, echoing through the hall. Then another, and another. She wasn't playing yet, just feeling the piano, reconnecting. Then she began. The first notes were quiet, almost hesitant, but there was something pure about them, something honest. People who were ready to laugh found themselves listening instead. The man's grin faded slightly. Her fingers moved gracefully, not with speed or force, but with emotion. The melody began to grow, flowing gently like a stream finding its rhythm. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was calm, beautiful, and deeply human. Every sound carried a feeling, every pause had meaning. In that moment, she wasn't the woman serving at the event. She wasn't the one being mocked. She was a musician again, a storyteller through sound. The room began to change. Conversations stopped. Waiters froze mid-step. Even the band members stood silently watching her. The man who had invited her to play tried to laugh again, but his voice caught in his throat. Something about the way she played, so sincere, so unpretentious, made his arrogance feel small. She continued, her expression calm but filled with quiet strength. Her hands moved faster now, the melody swelling and falling like waves. People leaned forward in their seats, caught off guard by the beauty unfolding before them. The music spoke to something in everyone there. Memories, regrets, love, loss, all hidden beneath their polished exteriors. And just as suddenly as it had begun, she stopped. The last note hung in the air, soft and trembling. Before fading into silence, for a few seconds no one moved. The entire room was still. It was as if the world had paused to listen. Then someone clapped. Just one person at first, then another. Then the sound grew until the whole room erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was genuine, heartfelt, amazed. She didn't bow. She simply smiled softly, nodded once, and stood. The man sat there silent. The smugness was gone from his face. He looked at her differently now, not with mockery, but with something close to respect or maybe shame. Without saying a word, she turned and walked away from the piano back toward her quiet place near the tables. People followed her with their eyes, whispering to each other, some smiling, some even looking thoughtful. The grand piano sat there, still gleaming under the lights, but now it meant something more. It wasn't just a decoration. It had spoken, and through it she had reminded everyone in that room of something they had forgotten: humility, grace, and the power of quiet talent. That night, in a hall full of powerful people, it wasn't money or status that commanded attention. It was her music. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the room had changed completely. People were no longer chatting casually or glancing at their phones. Their attention had shifted entirely, drawn to the quiet woman who had just played the piano like she owned the music itself. The man who had tried to embarrass her sat frozen, staring at her as if he could not believe what had just happened. His smile had vanished, replaced by a strange mix of disbelief and unease. He had expected something clumsy, a nervous stumble, a mess of wrong notes that would make him look clever in front of everyone. Instead, the music had been beautiful, alive, and confident. It had spoken more than words ever could, and now, sitting there with his friends, he felt the sudden weight of his own arrogance. For the first time that evening, he felt small, exposed, and strangely silent. The woman, meanwhile, returned to her duties, carrying herself with the same calm she had before. She didn't seek attention, nor did she want to make anyone feel bad. She only wanted to finish her work and continue with the evening. But something in the air had shifted and she could feel it. People were watching her differently now, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and a few with regret. A young man from the organizing team came up to her quietly, trying not to disturb the room. "That was incredible," he whispered, his eyes wide. "I had no idea you could play like that." She only smiled softly and shook her head. "It's been a long time," she said. "I just remembered how it felt." He nodded, but before he could say more, a commotion arose near the entrance. The businessman had stood up, adjusting his jacket and clearing his throat. He walked slowly toward her, a forced smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. People began to whisper, wondering what he would do next. Would he apologize? Would he try to reclaim his authority? The tension in the room grew with every step he took. "You played. Well," he said finally, his voice tight. "Better than I expected." There was a pause, a stiff silence hanging between them. She looked up at him, her expression neutral, neither proud nor defensive. "Thank you," she replied simply. Her voice was calm, steady, and it seemed to carry a quiet strength that he couldn't match. He frowned slightly, unsure how to respond. He had been used to controlling the conversation, to having the upper hand in every situation. But now, in front of all these people, he felt out of place. The laughter, the jokes, and the clever remarks he relied on to dominate a room had no power here. All he could do was stand and watch, a little embarrassed as she returned to her work. Around them, the guests began to speak in hushed tones. Some were amazed by her talent. Others were impressed by her confidence under pressure. A few people even admitted quietly that they had underestimated her, just as the businessman had. It was rare, they thought, to see someone so humble yet so gifted. They whispered about how unusual it was to find such quiet brilliance in someone so unassuming. Meanwhile, the woman went back to checking the tables and coordinating with the staff. Her movements were precise, calm, and professional, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But inside her heart was still racing. That brief moment at the piano had awakened something she hadn't felt in years, a mix of fear, excitement, and pride. She could still feel the vibrations of the last note in her chest, the way the music had stretched across the room and touched everyone there. The businessman watched her for a while, still unsure how to react. He had expected her to falter, to be nervous or clumsy, but instead she had handled the situation with grace. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He realized that his attempt to mock her had backfired completely. She had turned what could have been humiliation into a display of talent that left everyone else speechless. He tried to cover his discomfort with a small smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. People around him noticed the change in his demeanor. The friends who had laughed along with him were now quiet, some exchanging awkward glances. It was as if they were seeing him in a new light, someone who had underestimated a person based on appearances and assumptions. The woman continued her work, moving between the tables, making sure the guests had everything they needed. Some approached her, quietly complimenting her on the music, offering words of admiration. She thanked each person politely, her tone warm but modest. She wasn't seeking praise. She simply enjoyed sharing music, even if it was only for a brief moment. As the evening went on, the band began to play again, but the atmosphere had shifted. People were more attentive, more appreciative. The earlier laughter and casual chatter were replaced by a sense of respect. Guests began to look around the room differently, noticing the little details, the care put into the decorations, the smooth service, and the quiet efficiency of the staff who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The businessman remained seated for a while, watching her move gracefully from table to table. He couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. He had been so sure that he could embarrass her, that he could dominate the room with his confidence and wit. But the truth was clear, she had something he didn't. She had authenticity, skill, and a calm strength that couldn't be challenged by arrogance or wealth. At one point, he got up again and approached a small group of guests, trying to redirect the attention. But even as he spoke, people kept glancing back at her. Their eyes followed her movements, their whispers carrying admiration. It was impossible for him to reclaim the spotlight he had lost so easily. The more he tried, the more obvious it became that he had been outmatched, not by money, status, or charm, but by quiet talent and confidence. Meanwhile, the woman had returned to the piano, adjusting the bench and running her fingers lightly across the keys. She didn't play this time. She was simply touching the piano, feeling its presence, letting it remind her of the joy it had brought her. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to smile, thinking about how the night had unfolded. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about the music, about expressing herself in a way words never could. A few guests approached her cautiously, asking if she would play again. She shook her head gently. "Not tonight," she said. "I've already played what I wanted to share." They nodded, understanding that this was not about performance or applause. It was about something deeper. They respected her for it, quietly marveling at how someone so unassuming could command such attention without demanding it. The businessman, watching from across the room, finally seemed to understand. His smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by a thoughtful expression. He had been wrong, and he knew it. But admitting that in front of everyone was not easy. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing that his attempt to dominate the evening had backfired spectacularly. He had underestimated her, just as many others had. And the truth was undeniable. She had silenced the room with something far more powerful than ridicule. She had silenced it with talent, grace, and presence. Throughout the night, people continued to speak in low tones about what had happened. They marveled at her skill, her composure, and the way she had transformed a potentially humiliating situation into something extraordinary. Some admitted to themselves that they had been too quick to judge, too eager to assume that someone quiet or modest couldn't possess remarkable ability. They realized that the world often overlooks quiet brilliance, mistaking it for meekness or simplicity. The woman, unaware of the impact she had made, continued her work with humility and focus. She didn't seek recognition or validation. Her satisfaction came from knowing that she had done what she loved, in her own way, and that it had touched the people around her. The music had spoken for her, conveying what words could not. It had told a story of resilience, of quiet strength, and of the beauty found in authenticity. By the time the evening was winding down, the atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. The guests were no longer preoccupied with status, appearances, or clever conversation. Instead, they were engaged, attentive, and reflective. The music had left a mark on them, a reminder of something simple yet profound. True talent cannot be mocked, and genuine grace cannot be overshadowed by arrogance. The businessman eventually left the room quietly, his head lowered. He had been humbled, reminded that pride and assumption often lead to embarrassment rather than admiration. The woman continued her work, unbothered by his departure, her focus on the event and the people she was helping. She had proven nothing to him, yet everything to those who had witnessed her strength and skill. As the night drew to a close, the woman finally took a moment to breathe. She leaned against the piano, letting her fingers drift lightly across the keys one last time. The music was soft, almost imperceptible, but it carried the warmth and emotion of the evening. It was a quiet celebration, not of victory but of presence, passion, and the power of being true to oneself. Even as the guests left, whispering about what they had just experienced, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced the challenge, endured the scrutiny, and emerged with dignity. The night had tested her in ways she hadn't expected, but she had met it with honesty, courage, and quiet strength. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone in that room of something they often forgot. Talent, when paired with humility, commands respect in ways that arrogance never can. The piano sat in the center of the room, gleaming under the soft chandelier light. It had become more than just an instrument that evening. It was now a silent witness to what had already happened and a reminder of the quiet power the woman carried within her. She lingered by it for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly across the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. Each note seemed to echo faintly, like a whisper of what could come next. She had returned to her work, attending to the guests and coordinating the staff, but her mind was elsewhere. The earlier applause had filled her with a strange mixture of calm and tension. Calm, because she had done what she loved and expressed herself honestly. Tension, because she knew the man who had tried to humiliate her would not let the matter go so easily. She could feel his eyes following her every move, and even though he didn't speak, his presence was heavy in the room. He was pacing now, a subtle tension in his posture. At first, he had tried to mask his discomfort with small jokes and forced smiles, but she could see through it. He was frustrated, irritated by how powerless he felt despite his wealth and influence. In his mind, he had expected to control the situation, to dominate the room, and yet here he was, silent and unsure, watching someone he considered beneath him command attention with nothing but her talent. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of why she had agreed to play in the first place. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or seeking recognition. It was about the music, about expressing a story that lived inside her, one that words could not capture. Music had always been her refuge, her companion in moments of doubt and struggle. Tonight it had become her voice in a room that had tried to silence her. As she adjusted the piano bench, she could hear the soft murmur of the remaining guests. Many were still talking about her performance, expressing awe and admiration in quiet tones. Some admitted that they had underestimated her, assuming that someone so reserved could not possess such skill. Others whispered about the depth and emotion in her playing, noting how it had filled the room in a way that no conversation, no grand speech, could. The man who had tried to embarrass her was now approaching again, this time with a more deliberate pace. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "I think the room deserves to hear more," he said, his voice even, controlled but carrying a challenge beneath it. "Why don't you play another piece?" She looked at him calmly, her eyes steady. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a quiet understanding that this was a test, not just of her talent but of her courage, her poise, and her ability to remain true to herself in the face of pressure. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the request without a word. She wasn't intimidated. She knew that whatever she played would be a reflection of her own spirit, not a response to his provocation. Walking back to the piano, she felt the familiar pull of the keys beneath her fingers. It was a sensation she had not felt in years, yet it came naturally, like returning to a place she had always known. The room had grown quieter now, the remaining guests sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even the staff paused in their duties, curious and attentive, feeling the weight of the moment. She sat down and placed her hands lightly on the keys. The first note was soft, deliberate, almost hesitant, but it carried intention. She allowed herself to feel the emotion behind it, drawing from memories of the past, moments of struggle, quiet victories, and lessons learned. Each note became a sentence in a story she had carried silently for so long. The music started slowly, almost like a conversation, gentle and unassuming, yet filled with depth. As she continued, her confidence grew. The melody began to rise, intertwining with emotion, moving from soft, reflective phrases to more powerful, expressive passages. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and grace, each movement intentional, each chord resonating with meaning. The room was captivated. Guests who had once whispered in amusement or skepticism now sat in awe, watching and listening with full attention. The businessman remained seated, arms crossed, his expression tight with a mix of frustration and admiration. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that control and status were meaningless in the presence of genuine talent and authenticity. No amount of wealth, no display of influence could replicate the beauty, sincerity, and emotional depth she was creating through her music. The room had shifted entirely under her hands, and he could do nothing but watch. The music swelled, becoming richer, more complex. Each phrase carried a story of patience, endurance, and unspoken strength. It was not just a performance. It was a conversation with everyone present, touching something deep inside each listener. Some guests felt memories stirring, moments long forgotten, emotions they had kept hidden. Others simply marveled at her skill, unable to comprehend how someone so quiet and unassuming could command such presence. Despite the growing attention, she remained focused on the piano, on the music itself. She did not glance at the crowd or seek approval. Her performance was a dialogue between her and the instrument, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The keys responded to her touch as if they were extensions of her own voice, carrying nuances of feeling that transcended words. The businessman shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to interrupt, to redirect, to regain some sense of authority, but he couldn't. The music had claimed the room. It had drawn everyone into its flow, demanding attention and respect. He realized that his earlier attempts at humiliation had only highlighted her strength. She had turned the challenge into a showcase of grace, proving that true talent needed no validation, no provocation, and certainly no approval from someone like him. As the piece progressed, the mood in the room changed even further. The earlier tension and curiosity transformed into admiration and quiet awe. People leaned forward, listening intently, feeling the emotional journey she was conveying. The music moved from soft, reflective moments to passages of power and intensity, capturing the full spectrum of human emotion, hope, struggle, sorrow, and triumph. At one point, she allowed herself to close her eyes, letting the music flow through her without conscious control. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and the piano seemed to respond to every thought, every memory, every feeling she poured into it. The room, too, seemed to hold its breath, caught in the unfolding story, unable to look away or interrupt. The businessman's smirk had vanished entirely. He was no longer a figure of dominance in the room. He was just another observer, witnessing something far greater than he had anticipated. He felt a strange mix of humility and discomfort, realizing that he had misjudged her, and that his attempt to embarrass her had been not only futile but revealing of his own limitations. As the piece reached its climax, the music became almost overwhelming in its beauty and intensity. Every note was deliberate, every pause meaningful, every chord resonant with emotion. The room seemed to vibrate with the sound, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had slowed, allowing everyone to fully absorb the power and depth of what was unfolding before them. When the final notes were played, she allowed them to linger, soft and fading, until silence returned to the room. It was a silence filled with awe and reflection. No one spoke immediately. No one dared to move. The music had created a moment that felt timeless, leaving everyone present in quiet contemplation. Then, slowly, applause began to rise. At first it was hesitant, soft, as if people were testing the waters. But it grew steadily, becoming genuine, enthusiastic, and heartfelt. Guests stood, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes, all acknowledging the remarkable performance they had just witnessed. The atmosphere had transformed completely, from casual elegance to reverent admiration. The businessman, meanwhile, remained seated, processing what had just happened. He finally understood that his arrogance and attempts at control had been meaningless against authenticity and skill. He had been challenged not by words or confrontation, but by something far more powerful, by music, emotion, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew her own worth. The woman, still seated at the piano, allowed herself a small smile. She did not bow or seek attention. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the applause with quiet gratitude. Her performance had not been about proving anything to anyone. It had been about expressing herself, sharing a part of her soul, and standing firm in her truth. As she rose from the piano bench, the room continued to buzz with admiration and conversation. Guests approached her, offering compliments, expressing awe, and asking questions about her background. She answered politely, humbly, never exaggerating her abilities or seeking the spotlight. Her demeanor only enhanced the impression she had left. Someone remarkable yet approachable, talented yet grounded, powerful yet kind. By the end of the night, it was clear that the earlier attempt to humiliate her had completely failed. Instead of embarrassment, she had created a moment of beauty, respect, and lasting impact. The music had not only silenced the room, but had also spoken to the hearts of everyone present, leaving a memory that would be remembered long after the evening ended. The applause had faded, but the energy in the room lingered like a soft hum. People were still talking in hushed tones, many looking toward the piano as if expecting her to play again. She had returned to her duties, but her heart was still racing. The music she had shared had opened something inside her, something she had kept buried for years. And now she could feel it urging her forward. She moved between the tables, adjusting glassware and ensuring guests were comfortable. But her mind kept drifting back to the piano. It had become more than just an instrument. It was a bridge to something deeper, a way to speak without words. She had touched hearts tonight, though she hadn't planned to, and the thought both exhilarated and unnerved her. The businessman had retreated to a corner of the room after the first performance, nursing a drink and observing her. His friends had drifted back into their own conversations, but he stayed, his eyes fixed on her. At first he had thought the situation was amusing, a simple way to humiliate someone he considered beneath him. Now he was uncomfortable. He felt exposed in a way he hadn't expected. The room's attention had shifted, and he was no longer in control. He watched her with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He had expected her to falter under pressure, but instead she had risen with quiet strength. Her composure, her focus, and the emotion she had poured into her music had silenced the room. Even now, as she moved gracefully through her work, it was clear that something about her presence demanded respect. He couldn't quite understand it, and it irritated him. Meanwhile, she had approached the piano again almost instinctively. The keys glimmered under the chandelier as if inviting her to speak once more. She hesitated for a moment, letting her hands hover above the surface. Memories of past lessons, of late nights practicing in the dim light of her small room, filled her mind. She thought of the small triumphs and quiet struggles, the moments when music had been her only companion. It had always been her refuge, and tonight it had become her voice. A few guests noticed her returning to the piano and began to gather near the front of the room. They spoke in whispers, eyes wide with anticipation. Some were curious, some eager, and some clearly hoping she would perform again. The businessman noticed the shift and stiffened. He realized that if she played again, the room would be completely under her influence. This wasn't about skill anymore. It was about presence, about commanding attention without words or displays of power. She sat down on the bench, placing her fingers gently on the keys. The room grew quiet, sensing the moment. Even the band had stopped playing, leaving a stillness that made the air feel heavy with expectation. She didn't look at the guests, didn't seek approval. She only focused on the music, on the story she wanted to tell through each note. The first sound was soft, a single key pressed with care. It was deliberate, almost tentative, but it carried a depth that drew the listeners in. She let it linger, feeling the resonance beneath her fingers. Then another note, and another, each building carefully forming a melody that was both simple and profound. It was not a performance designed to impress. It was music born from emotion, from memory, from the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years. As she played, the melody grew, flowing gracefully from one phrase to the next. Her fingers moved with precision, yet there was an organic quality to each motion, a sense that the music was alive and breathing. Guests leaned forward, listening intently. The whispers had disappeared. The laughter, the casual chatter, all had vanished. In that moment, the room existed only for the sound she created. The businessman's expression had changed completely. His earlier arrogance had faded, replaced by a complex mix of astonishment, frustration, and awe. He had expected to dominate the situation, to humiliate her, to entertain the room with her discomfort. Instead, she had transformed the evening entirely, turning what could have been an embarrassing moment into something unforgettable. He felt powerless, and for the first time in a long while he was unsure of what to do. The music deepened, becoming more intricate and expressive. It carried emotion in every phrase, telling a story without words. There were moments of tension, of subtle conflict, followed by passages of serenity and hope. It was a journey through feeling, a dialogue that invited every listener to reflect, to remember, to connect. Some guests had tears in their eyes, moved by the raw honesty of what she was expressing. Others were simply captivated, unable to look away, their minds wholly absorbed in the unfolding melody. Her hands danced across the keys with effortless grace, each note intentional, each pause meaningful. She was completely immersed, lost in the flow of sound, yet fully aware of the room around her. She could feel the attention of every person in the hall, but it did not intimidate her. Instead, it strengthened her focus, guiding her to convey the music with clarity and emotion. The businessman shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He realized that his earlier attempts at dominance had been futile, that the power he believed he held was meaningless in the presence of genuine talent and authenticity. He had assumed she would be nervous, clumsy, or unprepared. Instead, she had demonstrated skill, composure, and an emotional depth that left no room for mockery. The room seemed to respond to her playing in a way that was almost tangible. The chandelier shimmered softly, the air seemed to vibrate, and the guests were drawn into the story she was telling. Each note seemed to touch something within them, stirring memories and emotions long buried. The music had created a connection, a shared experience that transcended words, appearances, and social status. As the piece reached its crescendo, the intensity grew. Her hands moved faster, yet with precision, creating a complex and beautiful tapestry of sound. The melody swelled, carrying with it a sense of triumph, of resilience, of strength earned through struggle. Every listener felt it differently, but everyone felt it. The room had been transformed, filled with a powerful energy that was impossible to ignore. The businessman leaned back, exhaling slowly. He could no longer deny her talent or the effect she had on the room. For the first time, he realized that his wealth, his status, and his confidence meant nothing in comparison to authenticity, skill, and the courage to stand quietly in one's own strength. He had underestimated her completely, and the realization was uncomfortable yet necessary. As the final notes of the piece resonated through the hall, she allowed them to linger, soft and fading. The room held its breath, caught in the delicate moment between sound and silence. Then slowly applause began to rise. At first it was tentative, soft, as if the guests were testing the reaction of others. But it grew steadily, becoming genuine, enthusiastic, and heartfelt. People rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, and some even whistling softly in admiration. She did not stand immediately, did not bow or demand attention. She simply acknowledged the applause with a small nod, letting it wash over her without needing to own it. The music had spoken, and that was enough. Her performance had not been about proving herself to the businessman or to anyone else. It had been about sharing a part of herself, about allowing the music to carry a story that could not be told in words alone. The businessman remained seated, processing what had happened. He had come to the evening expecting amusement, control, and superiority. Instead, he had witnessed something he could not manipulate, control, or diminish. She had turned potential humiliation into a moment of beauty, respect, and genuine admiration. His earlier arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a reluctant understanding of her strength. As she rose from the piano, guests continued to approach her with compliments and admiration. Some were moved to tears. Others expressed awe at her skill and composure. She accepted each remark with humility, responding politely and kindly. She did not exaggerate her abilities or seek recognition. Her presence alone was enough to leave a lasting impression. The room had been transformed. What had begun as a gala filled with casual chatter, laughter, and social posturing had become a space of reflection, admiration, and genuine appreciation. Guests whispered to each other about the performance, about her talent, and about the quiet strength she displayed. They realized that appearances could be deceiving, and that true ability often existed quietly, waiting to be recognized. The businessman eventually rose and excused himself quietly, his head lowered. He had been humbled, reminded that arrogance and assumptions could never match genuine talent and authenticity. The woman continued her work, her demeanor calm and professional, unaffected by his departure. She had proven nothing to him, yet everything to those who had witnessed her strength, courage, and skill. By the end of the night, the music had left a mark on everyone present. Guests left talking softly about the performance, reflecting on the impact of the evening and appreciating the quiet power that had unfolded before them. The woman had not sought attention or praise, yet she had captured hearts and commanded respect in a way that no words or gestures could achieve. As she finally took a moment to breathe, leaning lightly on the piano, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The night had challenged her, tested her courage, and demanded more than she had anticipated. Yet she had faced it with honesty, grace, and determination. The music had been her voice, and through it, she had reminded everyone. The music had stopped, but its echo lingered in the air like a gentle reminder of everything that had just happened. The room felt different now, as if the very atmosphere had been reshaped by her performance. Guests remained in their seats, unsure whether to speak or move. For a few moments, it seemed as if the world had paused, holding its breath in awe. She sat quietly at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys, her chest rising and falling with a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. She had shared her music, her emotions, and a part of herself with an audience that had not expected to witness anything extraordinary. And yet here they were, captivated, moved, and silent in a way that demanded acknowledgement. The businessman who had tried to humiliate her sat frozen, staring at her with an expression that was difficult to read. Pride, arrogance, and control had been stripped away, leaving behind a mix of surprise, discomfort, and reluctant respect. He had underestimated her completely. What he had assumed would be a moment of embarrassment had instead become a demonstration of quiet strength, mastery, and grace that no amount of status or wealth could overshadow. Slowly, The first clap sounded. It was soft at first, hesitant as if the person wasn't sure whether it was appropriate to break the spell that had formed in the room. Then another clap joined in, tentative but growing steadily. Within moments, the applause had become a wave, spreading through the room, heartfelt and genuine. Guests rose from their seats, cheering and clapping, some with tears glistening in their eyes. She did not rise immediately. She allowed the applause to wash over her, acknowledging it with a calm, composed nod. Her performance had not been about earning applause, but in that moment, she felt the weight of the audience's recognition. Their admiration was not for showmanship or bravado. It was for honesty, for courage, for the ability to express oneself so purely that it moved others without force or expectation. The businessman finally stood, awkwardly clapping along, his expression guarded. He had no words to offer, no clever remark or joke to regain his authority. All he could do was watch and acknowledge the truth he had tried so hard to avoid. She had outshone him without arrogance, without confrontation, simply by being herself. His ego had been challenged, and the lesson was uncomfortable but necessary. Guests approached her now, speaking in low, respectful tones. They complimented her skill, expressing admiration for the emotion and nuance in her playing. Some asked questions about her background. Others simply shook their heads in wonder, unable to find words to capture the impact she had made. She responded with humility, polite and calm, her tone reflecting the same quiet strength that had guided her performance. She had not planned to become the center of attention. She had only intended to play, to share the music that lived inside her. And yet in doing so, she had become something far more significant, a reminder of the power of authenticity, skill, and courage. The room had been silenced by her talent, and in that silence respect had grown. The businessman lingered nearby, hesitant, unsure of how to approach her. Pride had been replaced by a quiet realization. He had been wrong. He had assumed superiority based on status, wealth, and influence, but none of that mattered in the presence of genuine talent and composure. She had transformed what could have been a moment of humiliation into one of beauty and admiration, leaving him with nothing but the awareness of his misjudgment. Some guests, noticing the tension, gave him polite nods, acknowledging the performance and the woman who had commanded it. It was clear that he was no longer the center of attention, and perhaps for the first time he understood what it meant to be humbled. The applause continued, growing softer now, as the audience slowly began to process what they had witnessed. She finally stood from the piano bench, straightening her posture and brushing her hands lightly on her dress. She did not demand attention, nor did she flaunt her accomplishment. She simply acknowledged the crowd with a calm nod, her presence alone commanding respect. The applause continued, a gentle wave of appreciation that filled the room with warmth and admiration. Guests approached her one by one, offering words of praise, admiration, and gratitude. Some admitted that they had underestimated her, assuming that someone so quiet and reserved could not possess such talent. Others simply shook their heads in awe, marveling at the depth of emotion she had conveyed through her music. Every interaction reinforced the impression she had left. Someone remarkable yet unassuming, capable of touching hearts without seeking recognition. The businessman stepped forward at last, his expression measured. He cleared his throat and spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. I was wrong, he said. I underestimated you, and I didn't expect this. He gestured vaguely toward the piano, toward the room, toward the performance that had left everyone in awe. She looked at him calmly, her eyes steady, her expression neutral but kind. Thank you, she said softly. I didn't play for anyone but the music. His words hung in the air, an acknowledgement of his own error, a recognition of her strength. It was a small moment, but a significant one. He had been challenged, humbled, and reminded that arrogance and assumption could never match talent, authenticity, and courage. She had proven nothing to him in terms of status or superiority, yet she had demonstrated everything that mattered: skill, presence, and integrity. The room continued to buzz with quiet conversation. Guests reflected on the performance, on the woman who had played with such mastery and emotion, and on the lesson they had all witnessed. It was a moment that transcended social standing, wealth, and appearance. It was a reminder that true brilliance often exists quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. She returned to her duties after a brief pause, moving gracefully between the tables and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. Her composure never faltered, her focus unwavering. The guests, still captivated by her earlier performance, watched her with a mixture of respect and admiration. They spoke softly among themselves, noting how someone so unassuming could command such attention and leave such a lasting impression. The businessman observed quietly from a distance, no longer attempting to dominate or control the room. He had learned a subtle but powerful lesson about humility, about the limits of ego, and about the quiet strength of those who do not seek to prove themselves through arrogance or status. She had achieved what he could not. She had earned respect effortlessly, not through wealth, connections, or bravado, but through talent, courage, and authenticity. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the room shifted completely. What had begun as a casual social event, filled with polite chatter and elegant decorations, had transformed into a space of reflection, admiration, and quiet awe. Guests who had attended expecting entertainment or socializing found themselves witnesses to something far deeper, a demonstration of resilience, grace, and the transformative power of authentic talent. Even the staff, who had been quietly observing, were affected by the performance. They had seen her move through the evening with quiet diligence, never seeking attention, and yet she had commanded it in a way that was both subtle and profound. Her music had reminded them that true skill and dedication often go unnoticed, but when revealed, they leave an unforgettable mark. The woman herself felt a mix of exhaustion and fulfillment. Sharing her music had been both a challenge and a release. She had faced scrutiny, doubt, and the weight of expectation, yet she had emerged with dignity and impact. The applause, the whispers of admiration, and the quiet acknowledgement of her talent reinforced the sense of purpose that had guided her through the performance. As she stepped away from the piano one final time, she allowed herself a small private smile. She had faced the challenge, endured the scrutiny, and emerged not only unshaken but celebrated, not for arrogance or showmanship, but for the authenticity and courage she had displayed. The room had been silenced by her talent, and in that silence, she had created a space where respect, admiration, and reflection could flourish. The businessman finally approached her again, this time with a slightly more relaxed demeanor. He spoke quietly, almost reverently. "You've taught me something tonight," he said. "I thought I knew what power was, but I see now. It's not about money, influence, or control. It's about presence, authenticity, and the courage to be true to yourself." She nodded, acknowledging his words without judgment, understanding that he had learned a lesson he would not soon forget. Guests continued to offer compliments, sharing their amazement and gratitude for the experience they had witnessed. She responded with kindness and humility, never seeking to dominate the conversation or draw attention to herself. Her composure and grace only reinforced the impression she had left, someone whose quiet strength spoke louder than words or gestures ever could. By the end of the evening, the performance had become the defining moment of the night. Guests left talking about the music, about her talent, and about the lesson that had unfolded in front of them. The room, once filled with casual chatter and social posturing, had been transformed into a space of admiration, respect, and reflection. The woman had proven nothing through arrogance or force. She had achieved everything through courage, authenticity, and the quiet power of her music. As the final guests departed and the room grew quiet, she took a deep. The room had slowly emptied, leaving behind a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. Chairs were pushed back, glasses and plates cleared away, and the soft hum of conversation had vanished. Yet the energy lingered, a subtle vibration in the air, as if the evening itself had left an imprint on the space. The music she had played still echoed in the minds of everyone who had been present, a memory that refused to fade. She remained near the piano, standing quietly, letting the night settle around her. The sense of accomplishment was there, but it wasn't pride that filled her. It was a calm satisfaction, a deep understanding that she had faced a challenge with honesty and courage. She had allowed herself to be seen through her music, and in doing so, had shared a piece of her soul with everyone in the room. The businessman lingered as well, standing at a distance, observing her quietly. His usual arrogance had dissipated, replaced by a reflective, almost contemplative demeanor. He had come into the evening expecting dominance, expecting to entertain himself at the expense of someone he assumed was beneath him. Instead, he had been confronted with something far greater: talent, authenticity, and the quiet power of someone who did not need to prove herself through force or intimidation. He took a cautious step forward. "I want to say thank you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I didn't understand at first, but I see it now. The music. It's more than skill. It's presence, it's emotion, it's something I can't replicate or control." She looked at him, her expression calm but kind. "Music speaks for itself," she replied softly. "I didn't play for anyone but the music. It's up to others what they hear in it." His eyes softened slightly, a trace of humility breaking through. It was a rare moment for him, one where he acknowledged that he had misjudged someone, that his assumptions had been wrong, and that he had learned something valuable. The lesson was not easy, but it was necessary. He had been humbled, reminded that true respect and admiration could not be commanded, they had to be earned, and often in ways that could not be controlled or predicted. Guests who were still lingering approached her, offering final words of admiration and gratitude. They spoke of the emotion she had conveyed, of the way her music had moved them, and of the quiet confidence that had shone through. Some admitted they had expected a simple, polite performance, and instead had witnessed something extraordinary. Someone who could capture a room without demanding attention, without arrogance, simply by being herself and letting her talent speak. She accepted each compliment with humility, nodding and smiling, never seeking to dominate the conversation or draw further attention to herself. Her focus remained on the music, on the joy it had brought her, and on the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had faced a challenge with courage and integrity. The recognition she received was meaningful, but it was secondary to the experience itself, the act of playing, of expressing, and of sharing a piece of herself with others. The room, now nearly empty, felt different. It was no longer just a space for socializing. It had become a testament to the impact of authenticity and talent. The memory of her performance lingered in the minds of everyone who had been present. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and the power of quiet strength. It was a reminder that true brilliance often goes unnoticed until the right moment. And when it does, it leaves a lasting impression that cannot be ignored. Even the staff, who had been quietly observing throughout the evening, were affected. They had seen her move with grace and diligence, handling her duties with professionalism, and yet they had witnessed something extraordinary unfold. The music had transformed the atmosphere, touching everyone present and leaving an impression of quiet awe and admiration. They recognized, in a subtle but profound way, that talent, humility, and courage often coexist in ways that are both unexpected and powerful. The businessman finally approached her once more, this time with a measured, respectful tone. "You've reminded me tonight," he said, "that true power isn't in what you can control or dominate. It's in what you can create, in how you can touch people, in the presence you carry without needing validation. I underestimated you, and I hope to remember this lesson." She nodded, acknowledging the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she said softly. "The important thing is to let what you love speak for itself." He stayed for a moment longer, reflecting on what he had learned, before finally leaving quietly. There was no need for confrontation, no need to reassert control. He had been humbled, and the experience had given him a new perspective, one he would carry with him beyond the evening. He had witnessed firsthand how authenticity and talent could command respect in ways that authority, arrogance, and wealth never could. As the last guests departed, she lingered by the piano once more. Her hands hovered above the keys, and she allowed herself to touch them lightly. The familiar feeling of the instrument beneath her fingers brought a sense of calm and contentment. She did not play again. The music of the evening had already spoken, and its message lingered in the hearts of all who had heard it. The quiet of the room offered a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the evening, the challenges she had faced, and the courage it had taken to perform under pressure. She thought about the businessman, about the assumptions he had made, and about how she had turned his attempt to humiliate her into a moment of beauty and respect. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had faced the situation with integrity, grace, and quiet strength. The memory of her performance would stay with the guests, with the staff, and even with the businessman, long after the lights were dimmed and the room cleared. It was more than a performance. It was a demonstration of courage, authenticity, and the transformative power of talent expressed without pretense or expectation. People would remember how she had silenced the room, not through force or confrontation, but through presence, skill, and the quiet power of her music. She finally stepped away from the piano, allowing herself to breathe deeply. The night had tested her, challenged her, and demanded more than she had anticipated. Yet she had faced it all with composure and integrity. The experience had been a reminder that true strength is not always loud, that respect is earned through authenticity, and that courage is often quiet. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she felt a sense of fulfillment that had little to do with recognition or applause. The real achievement lay in the way she had expressed herself, touched others, and remained true to her own values and talents. The evening had shown her, and everyone present, that genuine ability and integrity carry a weight far greater than arrogance, status, or control. Walking out into the cool night air, she took a moment to look back at the building, the lights still glowing softly behind the windows. The experience had left an imprint not only in the minds of those inside, but also in her own sense of purpose and confidence. She had faced a challenge with honesty, courage, and skill, and she had emerged with dignity, respect, and a quiet sense of triumph. The city outside was calm, the streets glimmering under streetlights, and she felt a deep connection between herself, the music, and the world around her. The night had been more than an event. It had been a reminder of the power of authenticity, the impact of courage, and the beauty of expressing one's talents without fear. She walked home slowly, letting the events of the evening settle in her mind. Each step felt lighter, filled with a sense of accomplishment that needed no validation from others. She had faced a moment that could have been humiliating, and instead, she had turned it into a story of strength, grace, and the quiet power of music. In the days that followed, people spoke of her performance with admiration. Guests remembered the way the room had been silenced, the emotion in every note, and the calm confidence with which she had faced a challenge. They shared stories of how someone so unassuming had created such a profound impact, reminding everyone that appearances can be deceiving, and that true talent often lies quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. Even the businessman carried the memory with him, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He had come seeking dominance and amusement, only to be humbled by someone whose authenticity, skill, and quiet strength could not be undermined. The experience stayed with him, a reminder that respect and admiration are earned through presence, courage, and integrity, not through arrogance, influence, or attempts at control. For her, the evening remained a milestone, a confirmation of her own strength and abilities. She had faced scrutiny, challenge, and the weight of expectation, yet she had emerged with dignity, grace, and an impact that would last far beyond that night. The music had spoken where words could not, leaving behind a resonance that would linger in the hearts and minds of everyone who had witnessed it. As she finally closed the door behind her and walked into the quiet night, she carried with her a sense of fulfillment, peace, and quiet triumph. She had silenced the room, not through confrontation or aggression, but through presence, talent, and courage. The memory of that night and the lesson it imparted would stay with her and those who witnessed it forever. That true strength and brilliance are often quiet, yet impossible to ignore. And with that thought, she continued forward, carrying her music, her talent, and her integrity with her, ready for whatever